Poor mechanic fixes a girl's broken-down truck, unaware she's a rich farmer looking for true love. The road stretched endlessly beneath the burning Texas sun, dust swirling in the air as an old truck rumbled forward, until suddenly it didn't. With a final sputter, the engine died, leaving Olivia Harrington stranded on the side of a quiet country road. She sighed, pulling off her hat and wiping the sweat from her brow. This was not how today was supposed to go, but fate had other plans. Just a few miles away, Daniel Carter, a skilled but struggling mechanic, was locking up his small-town garage, unaware that his life was about to change forever. When he stopped to help the stranded woman, he thought it was just another roadside repair. He had no idea she was the Olivia Harrington, a wealthy rancher fighting to protect her family's legacy. He had no idea that this chance encounter would lead him down a path of love, loyalty, and a battle for something bigger than both of them. And he certainly had no idea that she was looking for a man like him. If you love stories of unexpected romance, small-town charm, and the power of love against all odds, then this is the one for you. Stick around as we unravel a heartfelt journey filled with passion, resilience, and the kind of love that only comes once in a lifetime. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more inspiring love stories just like this. Now, let's dive into the road to love. The Texas sun hung low in the sky, casting golden hues across the open fields. The road stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by rolling pastures and rustic wooden fences, a testament to the hard-working spirit of the small-town folk who had built their lives upon this land. Daniel Carter wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted, the rag tucked into his back pocket. The smell of oil and gasoline clung to his worn-out flannel shirt as he stepped out of the small auto repair shop he had worked in for the past 10 years. Life in the town of Willow Creek was simple, predictable, just the way he had come to accept it. His dreams of becoming a mechanical engineer had long faded into a quiet resignation, replaced by the necessity of putting food on the table for his younger brother Jake. As Daniel locked up the garage for the evening, the distant rumble of an approaching truck caught his attention. The old pickup, dusty and well-worn, was limping down the road, coughing out plumes of black smoke. The driver, a woman in a simple white button-up and faded jeans, gripped the wheel tightly as she guided the vehicle toward him. The truck barely made it past the shop's entrance before it shuddered violently and stalled. Daniel instinctively stepped forward. "Well, looks like she didn't want to go any further," he muttered to himself. The woman stepped out, frustration flickering across her face before she masked it with a polite, almost apologetic smile. "Looks like I'm in a bit of trouble here," she said, her voice carrying a smooth confidence. Daniel took in her appearance, a sturdy frame, sun-kissed skin, and auburn hair tied back into a loose ponytail. There was something about her that didn't quite fit the mold of the usual folks who passed through town. "You got lucky breaking down in the right place," Daniel said, wiping his hands on his rag. "Mind if I take a look?" she gestured, toward the smoking hood. "Be my guest." Daniel popped the hood, a cloud of steam escaping as he peered into the heart of the engine. A cracked radiator hose. The truck had probably been overheating for miles. "You've been running her pretty odd," he observed. The woman sighed. "Yeah, it's been a long day. I was hoping to make it back before dark." "Where's home?" She hesitated just for a second before answering. "A little ways outside town." Daniel nodded, not pressing the matter. Small towns had their fair share of strangers passing through. But something told him she wasn't just some traveler. "Passing by, I can patch this up well enough to get you home, but you'll need a replacement hose soon," he said. "Give me a few minutes." As he worked, she leaned against the truck, arms crossed. "You run this place?" "Not exactly. Just work here. Been at it for a while now." She tilted her head. Not many people stick around in small towns if they don't have to. Daniel let out a short chuckle. Guess that makes me an exception. A beat of silence passed between them before she extended her hand. Olivia, she introduced herself. He wiped his hands on his jeans before shaking hers. Daniel. There was something firm and self-assured in her grip. Nothing delicate or hesitant about it. She wasn't some city girl lost in the country. She belonged here, yet there was an air of mystery about her. So, Olivia, he continued, tightening the clamps on the hose, you make a habit of running your truck into the ground. She laughed, a warm, genuine sound that caught him off guard. Not usually. I guess I was too caught up in work. To notice the temperature gauge creeping up, Daniel straightened, wiping the grease off his fingers. What kind of work? Farming, she answered simply. His brows lifted slightly. Farming, huh? She grinned. Surprised? A little. You don't exactly scream ranch hand. That's because I own the place. Daniel blinked. You own a farm? Not just a farm. The Harrington Ranch, she admitted, studying his reaction carefully. Daniel had heard of it before. Everyone in Willow Creek had. The Harrington name was synonymous with success. It was one of the largest privately owned agricultural businesses in the county, if not the state. But he had never once heard of the owner being a woman, let alone someone his age. He masked his surprise, shaking his head as he secured the last clamp. Well, that explains the truck. You probably put this thing through hell on a daily basis, she chuckled. That's an understatement. Daniel closed the hood and wiped his hands one last time. She should be good to go for now. Just take it easy on the drive back. Olivia pulled out her wallet. How much do I owe you? Daniel waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry about it. It was a quick fix. She hesitated, as if debating whether to insist, but then simply nodded. Well, thank you. I owe you one then. Just doing my job. She climbed into the truck, pausing for a moment as if she wanted to say something more, but instead she just gave him a nod before turning the key. The engine roared to life, and Daniel took a step back, watching as she pulled away down the road, disappearing into the golden horizon. As he stood there, hands on his hips, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple encounter. Something about Olivia Harrington lingered in his mind, like the ghost of a thought not yet fully formed. Whatever it was, he had a feeling he hadn't seen the last of her. The evening breeze rustled through the trees as Olivia drove down the dusty country road, the rhythmic hum of her truck's engine settling into a steady beat. The golden light of dusk cast long shadows over the fields, stretching toward the horizon like an endless sea of green. She should have felt relieved to be heading home, but her mind was elsewhere, stuck on the man who had just fixed her truck without asking for anything in return. Daniel Carter. There was something about him, his quiet confidence, the way he spoke, straightforward, no pretense, the way he had wiped his hands on his jeans before shaking hers, as if to avoid dirtying her, even though she hadn't minded in the slightest. It had been a long time since Olivia had met someone who treated her like just another person, not a millionaire, not a landowner, just a woman with a broken-down truck. She wasn't used to that. As the Harrington Ranch came into view, her thoughts were interrupted by the sight of her ranch foreman, Bill, standing by the main barn, arms crossed. He was a grizzled man in his 60s, with a face weathered by years in the sun. As she pulled up and parked, he strode over. "Truck give out on you again?" he asked, glancing at the hood. "Yeah. Overheated," she admitted, stepping down. "A mechanic in town patched it up." Bill arched a brow. "Who?" "Daniel Carter," she said, testing his reaction. Bill grunted. "Carter boy, huh? Good hands, that one. Honest, hard-working. His old man was the same way before he passed." Olivia looked up, interested. "You knew his father?" Knew of him, Bill corrected. Damn good mechanic. Took care of this town before cancer took him. Daniel's been looking after his younger brother since then. Gave up a shot at college, I heard. Olivia frowned, something in her chest tightening at the thought. I didn't know that. Most people don't, Bill said simply. Kid. Doesn't talk much about himself. She nodded, thoughtful. Daniel leaned against the open garage door, the familiar scent of oil and metal hanging in the air. The shop had closed for the evening, but he hadn't left yet. Instead, he stood staring out at the road, where Olivia's truck had disappeared, still thinking about the strange turn his day had taken. You look like a man who's just seen. A ghost! A voice cut through the quiet. Daniel turned to find Jake, his 20-year-old brother, standing by the workbench, arms folded. Jake had the same sharp features as Daniel, but with a younger, more restless energy about him. It's nothing, Daniel muttered, shaking his head. Jake smirked. Uh-huh, sure. Nothing to do with the woman who just drove off looking at you like you were a puzzle she wanted to solve? Daniel shot him a look. Mind your business, Jake chuckled. Come on, man. Who was she? Daniel hesitated, then shrugged. Olivia Harrington. Jake's eyebrows shot up. Wait, the Olivia Harrington? As in, owns half this county Olivia Harrington? Daniel nodded. Jake let out a low whistle. And what, she just happened to stroll into your shop needing help? Daniel rubbed a hand over his jaw. Truck broke down outside the shop. I fixed it. That's all. Jake studied him for a moment before shaking his head. You're a terrible liar, Daniel sighed. Look, she seemed different. Not what you'd expect from someone who owns that much land. Jake grinned. You interested? Daniel scoffed. She's way out of my league, Jake. Jake rolled his eyes. Yeah, well, I don't think she got that memo. Daniel didn't respond. He wasn't going to sit here and entertain the idea that a woman like Olivia Harrington would ever look twice at a guy like him. But still, something about her had stuck with him. The next afternoon, Olivia found herself back in town. She wasn't sure why she had made the trip. At least, that's what she told herself. The ranch had plenty of work to do, and yet here she was, parking outside the garage where Daniel worked. The bay doors were open, and she spotted him under the hood of an old Chevy, his hands deep in the engine. She leaned against the doorway, watching for a moment before clearing her throat. Daniel looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he straightened. Olivia, she smiled. Didn't think I'd see you again so soon, did you? Not particularly, he admitted, wiping his hands on a rag. Truck acting up again? Nope. Just thought I'd drop by and say thanks. He studied her for a moment, then smirked. That's a long drive just to say thanks, she shrugged. Maybe, or maybe I was curious about the mechanic who wouldn't take my money, Daniel chuckled. Not used to people turning down cash, huh? Not really. She leaned against the workbench. So, tell me, Daniel Carter, why'd you let me go without charging me? He hesitated, then sighed. Because it was an easy fix, and because, I don't know. You didn't seem like the type to expect special treatment. She tilted her head, intrigued. And what type do I seem like? He met her gaze, his blue eyes steady. Like someone who's used to doing everything on her own. The comment hit a little too close to home. Olivia felt her breath hitch, but quickly covered it with a smirk. Maybe. Daniel nodded, turning back to the car he had been working on. Well, you're welcome, but if you ever need a real repair, I won't turn down payment twice. She smiled. Fair enough. A comfortable silence settled between them before Olivia glanced at her watch. I should probably get back to the ranch. Drive safe, Daniel said, watching as she turned to leave. Just before stepping out, she paused. Actually, we could use someone to service our tractors and other equipment. I don't suppose you'd be interested. Daniel hesitated. You offering me a job? She lifted a brow. Think of it as a favor. I hate seeing good machines. Go to waste. He considered for a moment before nodding. I'll think about it, Olivia smiled. Good, let me know. With that, she walked out, leaving Daniel standing there, feeling, against all logic, that his world had just shifted in a way he wasn't quite ready for. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Willow Creek, its warm light stretching long shadows across the quiet town. Daniel Carter sat on the worn wooden steps of his small garage, rolling up the sleeves of his flannel shirt as the scent of motor oil and warm pavement filled the air. His mind, however, wasn't on the cars he had worked on that day. It was on Olivia Harrington. She had shown up again, not out of necessity, not because her truck had broken down, but simply to see him. And then she had done something even more unexpected. She had offered him a job, a man like him, working for a woman like her. The idea seemed ridiculous, and yet the thought lingered. Jake stepped out of the garage, tossing an empty soda can into a nearby bin. So you're going to take the job? Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. I don't know, man. It's not really my thing. Jake smirked. Fixing stuff isn't your thing? Pretty sure that's all you do. Daniel shot him a look. You know what I mean? Yeah, I do, Jake said, plopping down next to him. You don't think you belong in her world? Daniel didn't respond right away. That was exactly it. He had spent his whole life in Willow Creek, taking care of his younger brother after their parents had passed. College had been a dream left behind in favor of survival. Olivia, on the other hand, was a woman of privilege, running an empire of land and wealth. He didn't belong in her world. Jake sighed. Look, I get it, but maybe this isn't about where you think you belong. Maybe it's just about taking a good opportunity. Daniel rubbed a hand over his jaw, considering his brother's words. Besides, Jake added with a grin, wouldn't hurt to spend a little more time around Miss Harrington, would it? Daniel scoffed, shoving his brother's shoulder. Shut up! Jake laughed, standing up and stretching. Just think about it, all right? Lord knows you could use a change of scenery. Daniel watched his brother disappear back into the garage. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time for something different. The next morning, Olivia was walking through the barn, inspecting the tractors and other equipment, when she heard the familiar rumble of an approaching truck. She turned just in time to see Daniel pulling up in his old Chevy, dust kicking up behind him as he parked near the main house. A small smile tugged at her lips. She hadn't been sure if he would come. Daniel stepped out, hands tucked into the pockets of his jeans as he took in the vastness of the ranch. He had never been here before, but he had heard about it. Everyone in Willow Creek had. Seeing it up close was something else entirely. Olivia met him halfway. Morning, she greeted, trying to gauge his expression. Daniel nodded. Morning. So, she tilted her head. You thinking about taking the job? He let out a slow breath, glancing around at the field stretching beyond them. Figured I'd at least see what I'm getting myself into. Olivia grinned. Fair enough. Come on, I'll show you around. She led him through the property, pointing out the different sections. The barns, the grazing fields, the machinery, sheds. Daniel listened, taking it all in, but what struck him most wasn't just the size of the place. It was how much Olivia knew about it. She wasn't some absentee owner sitting in an office while others did the hard work. She understood every aspect of the ranch, from soil conditions to the mechanics of her machines. Most of our tractors are newer models, she explained, brushing her hand against the side of a green John Deere. But some of the older ones still run better when they're actually running. Daniel smirked. Sounds like you're in need of a good mechanic. Olivia crossed her arms. That's what I keep telling you. He chuckled. All right, I'll take the job. A flicker of satisfaction crossed her face. Good. I was hoping you would. Daniel arched a brow. You that desperate for help? She shrugged. Let's just say I prefer working with people I trust. Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary before clearing his throat. Well, I guess I better get to work then. Over the next week, Daniel settled into his new role at the ranch. He split his time between the garage and the fields, working on tractors, combines, and irrigation systems that hadn't been serviced in far too long. It wasn't all that different from fixing cars. Machines were machines, but there was something oddly satisfying about working on land that actually produced something. Olivia had a habit of checking in on him, though she always played it off as casual conversation. "How's it coming along?" she asked one afternoon, leaning against a tool bench as Daniel worked beneath a tractor. "Slow," he replied, voice muffled. "This thing's older than I am," she smirked. "That's not saying much." Daniel slid out from under the machine, giving her an amused look. "Funny," she shrugged. "I try." There was something easy about being around her, something natural. Daniel had been wary at first, expecting to feel out of place. But the more time he spent at the ranch, the more he realized Olivia wasn't as different from him as he had assumed. She worked just as hard as anyone else, maybe harder, and she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. One evening, after a long day of work, Daniel was washing grease off his hands at the outdoor sink when Olivia walked up beside him. The sun was setting, casting an amber glow over the ranch. "You did good today," she said. Daniel dried his hands on a rag. "That's supposed to be a compliment?" She smirked. "Don't let it go to your head." They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, just watching the sky change colors. It was a peaceful kind of silence, the kind Daniel hadn't realized he had been missing. Then Olivia turned to him, something unreadable in her eyes. "You know, when I hired you, I wasn't just looking for someone to fix machines." Daniel met her gaze. "No?" She shook her head. "I was looking for someone I could count on." Daniel swallowed, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He had spent so much of his life being the one others relied on, Jake, his late parents, the garage. He wasn't used to the idea that someone like Olivia might need him, too. Before he could respond, she gave him a small smile and stepped away. "See you tomorrow, Carter." And just like that, she was gone, leaving him standing there, heart pounding in a way he didn't quite understand. Maybe Jake had been right, maybe. This job really was going to change things. The rhythmic hum of a tractor echoed across the open fields as the late afternoon sun bathed the Harrington Ranch in hues of amber and gold. The air was thick with the scent of freshly tilled earth, and a warm breeze rustled through the tall grass. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow, leaning against the open hood of an aging combine harvester that had seen better days. He had spent the last 3 weeks working on the ranch, fixing everything from broken irrigation pipes to finicky engines. Despite his initial doubts, he had to admit he liked it here. The work was honest, the people respectful, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was building something instead of just getting by. And then, of course, there was Olivia. He wasn't sure what to make of her yet. She was sharp, determined, and undeniably capable, but every now and then there was a moment, a flicker of vulnerability in her gaze, a quiet hesitation in her voice that made him wonder if there was more to her story than what she let on. And if he was being honest, he found himself wanting to know, "How's it coming along?" Daniel turned to see Olivia walking toward him, her sleeves rolled up and her boots kicking up small clouds of dust. She looked at ease, like she belonged here in a way he wasn't sure he ever would. "She's old," he said, patting the side of the combine. "But she's got some life left in her," Olivia smirked. "Kinda like Bill." Daniel chuckled. The ranch foreman had become a near-constant presence in his work, grumbling about damn machinery, but secretly appreciating Daniel's skill. "Give me another hour, and she'll be running smoother than ever," he said. Olivia nodded, glancing at the sky. "Good. I was hoping we could finish early today." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "There's something I want to show you." Daniel studied her for a moment, but she didn't offer any further explanation. Instead, she simply turned and motioned for him to follow. Against his better judgment, he did. They drove in Olivia's truck, winding through the back roads of the ranch. The golden hour painted the land in warm hues, casting long shadows across the fields. Daniel watched Olivia from the corner of his eye. She was relaxed, one hand on the wheel, humming softly to the radio. "So, are you going to tell me where we're going?" he asked. She smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" Daniel shook his head, but he couldn't fight the small smile tugging at his lips. He wasn't used to this, being pulled into something unexpected, something unplanned. His life had been a routine of responsibilities for so long that the idea of simply following someone else's lead felt foreign. But with Olivia, it didn't seem so bad. After about 20 minutes, she pulled the truck onto a dirt road, driving past a wooden fence that looked older than the town itself. They came to a stop in front of a sprawling oak tree, its branches stretching toward the sky like open arms. Beneath it sat an old wooden bench, weathered by time. Olivia cut the engine and hopped out. "Come on." Daniel followed, glancing around. "What is this place?" She sat on the bench, motioning for him to do the same. "This," she said, looking out at the land beyond them, "is my favorite spot on the ranch." Daniel sat beside her, taking in the view. From here, he could see the fields rolling out endlessly before them, the distant barn, the cattle grazing lazily in the fading light. It was beautiful in a way he hadn't expected. "My dad used to bring me here when I was a kid," Olivia continued, her voice softer now. "Whenever things got overwhelming, we'd come sit under this tree, and he'd remind me why we do what we do." Daniel glanced at her. "And why is that?" She smiled faintly. "Because this land isn't just ours. It belongs to the people who work it, the families who depend on it. It's a responsibility, not just a business." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding her words more than he expected to. "You know," she said after a moment, "I don't think I've ever met someone who didn't treat me differently after finding out who I am." Daniel leaned back against the bench. "You mean Rich?" She chuckled. "I mean Olivia Harrington, the landowner, the boss, the woman who's supposed to have everything figured out." He studied her, seeing the truth in her eyes. "And what if I just see Olivia?" She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "Then I guess you'd be the first." The weight of her words settled between them, and for a moment neither spoke. The air was thick with something unspoken, something neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge just yet. But it was there, and it wasn't going away. By the time they made it back to the ranch, the stars had begun to dot the sky. Olivia parked the truck near the barn, but neither of them moved to get out just yet. "You ever think about leaving?" Daniel asked suddenly. Olivia frowned. "Leaving? This place, the ranch, doing something different?" She considered the question, then shook her head. "No, it's my home. Even when it's hard, even when it feels like too much, I could never leave it behind." Daniel nodded, exhaling slowly. "Must be nice to have something like that." Olivia studied him, sensing there was more behind his words. "You don't?" she asked gently. Daniel hesitated, gripping the steering wheel loosely. "I don't know. I spent so much time looking out for Jake, making sure he had a shot at something better. I guess I never stopped to think about what I wanted." Olivia was quiet for a moment before she said, "Maybe it's time you do." Daniel looked at her then, and in the dim light she looked softer, less guarded. Maybe she was right. Maybe this place, this job, this woman was exactly what he needed. But just as the thought settled, a voice called out from the barn. "Olivia!" They both turned to see Bill striding toward them, urgency in his step. "We've got a problem," he said. Daniel and Olivia exchanged a glance before jumping out of the truck. The moment was gone. Reality had returned. But something had changed, and neither of them could ignore it. The air was thick with tension as Olivia and Daniel hurried toward the barn, following Bill's hurried strides. The old foreman rarely showed urgency. He had been on this ranch longer than Olivia had been alive, and it took a lot to shake him. But tonight, something was different. When they reached the open barn doors, Olivia's sharp eyes immediately took in the problem. One of the cattle pens had been broken open, its wooden beams splintered. A few frightened cows milled around, lowing in distress. Beyond them, tire tracks cut through the dirt, a trail leading out past the fields toward the back roads. Someone had been here. Someone had tried to steal from them. "Damn rustlers," Bill muttered, crouching to inspect the tracks. "Looks like they tried to load up some of the cattle, but something must have spooked them before they could take more." Olivia clenched her jaw. Cattle theft wasn't just some relic of the Old West. It was a real threat, especially to ranches like hers, where a single stolen cow could mean a loss of thousands of dollars. Daniel studied the damage. "Any cameras on this side of the property?" Olivia shook her head. "No, most of our surveillance is near the front gates, not out here." Bill stood up, dusting off his jeans. "We should call the sheriff, even if they didn't get much. This time, they might try again." "I'll handle it," Olivia said, pulling out her phone. As she stepped away to make the call, Daniel ran a hand through his hair, watching her. There was a quiet intensity about her right now. She wasn't panicking, but she was definitely angry. "You ever deal with this before?" he asked Bill. The older man sighed. "A few times over the years, but it's been a while since anyone tried something this bold." He gave Daniel a knowing look. "That woman's been fighting to keep this place running since the day her daddy passed. Ain't the first time she's had to stand her ground, and it won't be the last." Daniel nodded slowly, his respect for Olivia deepening. A few minutes later, she returned. "Sheriff's sending someone out to take a report," she said, slipping her phone back into her pocket. "Good," Bill grunted. "I'll check the rest of the fences, make sure nothing else is vulnerable." Daniel turned to Olivia. "Want me to stick around? Might need an extra set of hands if you're going to be dealing with the sheriff and all." She hesitated, just for a moment, but then nodded. "Yeah, I'd appreciate that." While waiting for the sheriff, Olivia walked toward the main house, Daniel beside her. The night had grown quieter, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "You all right?" Daniel asked, glancing at her. Olivia sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. "I'm fine, just frustrated. This ranch has been in my family for generations, and every time something like this happens, I feel like I'm letting my father down." Daniel frowned. "How is this your fault?" She let out a dry laugh. "Because it's my job to protect this place. My dad built this ranch from the ground up. He taught me everything I know. And when he died, people doubted me. They didn't think a woman could run something this big on her own." Daniel watched her carefully. He could hear the weight in her words, the burden of expectation, of proving herself. "And?" he prompted. She smiled faintly. "And I did it anyway." Daniel chuckled. "Sounds like you proved 'em wrong." She exhaled, glancing up at the stars. "Maybe. But sometimes it feels like I'm just waiting for something to go wrong. Like no matter how much I work, how much I plan, I'll never be able to protect it the way my father did." Daniel was quiet for a moment before saying, "You?" "No, I spent so much time looking after my brother after our parents passed that I never thought about what I wanted. Every decision I made was about keeping things together, about making sure he had a shot at a better life." Olivia looked at him, interest flickering in her eyes. "And now?" Daniel shrugged. "Now, I'm still figuring that out. But I do know one thing. You can't carry everything alone. You don't have to." She studied him, as if weighing his words, before giving him a small nod. "That," she said, "is easier said than done." Daniel smirked. Yeah, well, I never said it was easy. For the first time that night, Olivia laughed, a genuine light sound that made something stir in Daniel's chest. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to let her guard down. The sheriff arrived soon after, a stocky man in his late 50s named Sheriff Tate. He had been in Willow Creek for decades, knew everyone by name, and took crime, no matter how small, personally. "Looks like someone tried to make off with your livestock," he said after inspecting the scene. "Any idea who it might be?" Olivia shook her head. No, but they knew what they were doing. They went straight for the pens, didn't bother with the main house or the equipment. Tate nodded, rubbing his chin. "I'll ask around. See if anyone's been trying to sell cattle that don't belong to 'em. In the meantime, you might want to reinforce security out here." "I will," Olivia assured him. Tate turned to Daniel. "You working here now, Carter?" Daniel nodded. "Just started a few weeks ago." Tate smirked. "Good. She could use someone who knows how to handle himself." Olivia rolled her eyes. "I can handle myself just fine, Sheriff." Tate chuckled. "That I don't doubt." He tipped his hat. "I'll be in touch if we find anything." As the sheriff drove off, Olivia let out a slow breath. "I hate this part," she muttered. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" "The waiting," she admitted. "Knowing someone's out there, thinking they can take what doesn't belong to them." Daniel considered her words, then said, "You know, you're not the only one who can stand guard." She gave him a questioning. "Look, I'll stick around," he said simply. "At least for a few nights. Keep an eye on things." Olivia hesitated, as if she wanted to argue, but then something in her expression softened. "All right," she said. "But if you're going to be pulling night shifts, at least let me get you some decent coffee." Daniel grinned. "Deal." As they walked back toward the house, Olivia stole one last glance at him. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. And that, she realized, made all the difference. The Texas night stretched wide and endless, a dark canvas speckled with stars. The air was cool, carrying the distant sounds of cattle shifting in their pens and the occasional chirp of crickets. Daniel stood near the barn, arms crossed, scanning the property with quiet focus. He wasn't a ranch hand. He wasn't a security guard, but something about Olivia's quiet determination had made him stay. And truthfully, a part of him had wanted to. A soft creak behind him made him turn. Olivia stepped out of the house, a steaming mug in each hand. She was wearing a worn-out flannel over her jeans, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. "Figured you could use something to keep you awake," she said, offering him a mug. Daniel accepted it, taking a slow sip. Strong, just the way he liked it. "You always up this late?" he asked, watching her as she leaned against the wooden railing of the porch. "Not usually," she admitted. "But tonight's different." He nodded, understanding. The cattle theft attempt had shaken her more than she let on. He had seen it in her face earlier, the frustration, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. "You should get some rest," he said. "I'll keep watch," she smirked. "I don't sleep much when something's on my mind." Daniel studied her. "That happen often?" "More than I'd like to admit." A quiet moment passed between them, filled only by the soft sounds of the ranch at night. Olivia sipped her coffee, gazing out at the land that stretched before them. "This place means everything to you, doesn't it?" Daniel asked, his voice low. She nodded. "It's not just land. It's my family's legacy. My father spent his life building this place, and when he died, I promised I'd keep it going, no matter what." Daniel leaned against the railing beside her. "That's a hell of a promise to keep." "It is," she admitted, "and sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough to keep it." He turned to her then, really looking at her. Olivia Harrington was tough, strong-willed, independent, unshaken by hard work. But beneath it all, she was just a person trying to hold everything together. "You are," he said simply. She looked at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "How do you know?" Daniel shrugged. Because you're still here, still fighting for it. A flicker of something crossed her face, something unspoken, something that made his chest tighten in a way he didn't quite understand. She held his gaze for a moment longer before letting out a small laugh. You always this sure of things? He smirked. Only when I'm right. Olivia shook her head, smiling, and took another sip of her coffee. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was easy, familiar. Then, without thinking, she said, "You should stay." Daniel blinked. "What? On the ranch," she clarified. "Not just for tonight. Stay longer." Daniel hesitated. He had told himself from the start that this was temporary, that he didn't belong in a place like this. But now he wasn't so sure. "Think I'd make a good ranch hand?" he asked, half teasing. Olivia smiled. "I think you'd make a good anything you set your mind to." His heart did something strange in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was because of her words or the way she said them, so certain, so steady. "Something to think about," he murmured. She nodded, but there was something in her eyes, hope, maybe, that made him wonder if she wanted him to stay more than she was letting on, and that, more than anything, made him want to. As the night stretched on, Daniel stayed near the barn, keeping watch. Olivia had finally gone inside, but he knew she wasn't really sleeping. She was too restless, too protective of this place to fully let her guard down. And damn if he didn't understand that feeling, because for the first time in years, he felt like he was guarding something that actually mattered, not just machines, not just responsibilities, something real, someone real. As he stared out into the quiet darkness of the ranch, he realized something. He wasn't just here because of the job. He was here because of her, and that terrified him more than anything. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch as Daniel tightened the last bolt on the tractor he'd been working on since dawn. The rhythmic clinking of metal on metal filled the air, blending with the distant sound of cattle lowing in the fields. He had barely slept. Not because of the long hours he had spent keeping watch, but because of the conversation he had shared with Olivia the night before. The way she had looked at him, the way her voice had softened when she asked him to stay, it had unsettled something deep within him. He wasn't used to feeling needed, and he sure as hell wasn't used to the idea of wanting to stay. But here he was. A shadow passed over him, and he looked up to find Olivia standing a few feet away, a thermos in one hand and 2 coffee mugs in the other. "Morning," she greeted, offering him a cup. Daniel wiped the grease from his hands before taking it. "Morning." She leaned against the workbench beside him, sipping her coffee. "Didn't sleep much, did you?" Daniel smirked. "Didn't think you did either." She chuckled. "Touché." For a moment they just stood there, the silence between them comfortable. But then Olivia took a breath, and Daniel could tell she was about to say something important. "I meant what I said last night," she began, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I want you to stay." Daniel stared at her, heart pounding. "Olivia..." She turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "I don't just mean for the job, Daniel. I mean, I want you here. On the ranch, in my life." The weight of her words settled. Between them, thick and undeniable. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. This is a lot," he admitted. "I know," she said softly, "and I'm not asking for an answer right now. I don't want to pretend. Like this doesn't mean something." Daniel's chest tightened. It did mean something. It meant everything. And that was the problem, because the moment he let himself believe he could have this life, this woman, was the moment it could all be taken away. "I don't belong in your world, Olivia," he said, his voice quieter than before. She frowned. "What are you talking about?" Daniel swallowed hard. "I've spent my whole life fixing things for other people, making sure my brother had a future, making sure nothing fell apart. but I never stopped to think about what I wanted because, hell, maybe I don't deserve to. Olivia's expression softened, but her voice was firm. You deserve happiness just as much as anyone else, Daniel. He let out a dry chuckle. Yeah? And what happens when this all falls apart? When you realize I don't fit into this life of yours? She stepped closer, eyes blazing. That's not your decision to make for me. Daniel held her gaze, his mind warring with itself, and then, before he could say something else, before he could talk himself out of it, Olivia did the one thing he wasn't expecting. She kissed him. It wasn't hesitant or unsure. It was firm, deliberate, like she had already made her choice, like she was trying to tell him everything words couldn't. Daniel froze for half a second before his instincts took over, before he realized just how badly he wanted this. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he let himself stop thinking. But just as quickly as it started, Olivia pulled back, her breath uneven. I know you're scared, she murmured. So am I, but I'm not letting you run from this. Daniel's heart pounded against his ribs. He should walk away. He should say something to push her away before this went too far, but he didn't. Instead, he just whispered, okay, and somehow that was enough. For the rest of the day, Daniel threw himself into work, trying to keep his mind occupied. But no matter how much he busied himself with tractors and repairs, he couldn't stop replaying that moment in his head. The way Olivia had looked at him, the way she had kissed him, the way she had made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he belonged here after all. But reality had a way of creeping back in. Later that afternoon, as he was finishing up an oil change on one of the ranch's trucks, he overheard a conversation that made his stomach turn. Two of the ranch hands, men who had been working here for years, stood near the barn, their voices low but not quiet enough. I don't know about that Carter guy, one of them muttered. Seems awful cozy with the boss. Yeah, the other agreed. Don't get me wrong, he's good at what he does, but Olivia ain't exactly the kind to bring in outsiders unless she's got a reason. Think she's got a thing for him? A chuckle. Wouldn't be surprised. But let's be real. Guys like him don't end up with women like her. Daniel's grip on the wrench tightened, jaw clenching. He wasn't surprised by the words. Hell, he had told himself the same thing 100 times, but hearing it from someone else, that was different, and it reminded him, in no uncertain terms, that no matter how much he wanted to believe Olivia's world could be his, there would always be people who saw him as nothing more than the poor mechanic who didn't belong, and maybe, just maybe, they were right. That night, when Olivia came to find him again, Daniel was different, distant, guarded. She frowned. Something's wrong. Daniel shook his head. Just tired. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. You sure? He forced a smile. Yeah. She hesitated, but eventually nodded. Okay. Well, good night, Daniel. Good night. And as she walked away, Daniel felt it. The slow, creeping realization that no matter how much he wanted to be part of this life, part of her life, some things weren't meant to last. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and hay as the first rays of sunlight stretched over the fields. The ranch was already stirring, workers tending to the cattle, the rhythmic clanking of metal gates swinging open, the distant hum of a tractor in motion. It was another day like any other, except it wasn't, not for Daniel. He stood outside the barn, hands in his pockets, staring at the horizon as if it might give him an answer he didn't have. Last night's conversation, the way Olivia had looked at him, the quiet intensity in her voice when she asked him to stay, still echoed in his mind. And then there were the words he had overheard from the ranch hands. Guys like him don't end up with women like her. Daniel had spent his entire life fighting against the odds, doing what needed to be done without expecting anything in return. He wasn't the kind of man who got to have more. More than survival, more than responsibilities, more than fixing other people's problems. And yet, Olivia made him want to believe differently. But was that enough? He heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Jake walking toward him, a knowing look on his face. "You've got that look," Jake said, crossing his arms. Daniel arched a brow. "What look?" "The one you get when you're thinking too damn much." Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's complicated." Jake scoffed. "No, it's not. You like her. She likes you." End of story. Daniel let out a dry laugh. "Yeah. Well, the rest of the world doesn't see it that way." Jake's expression hardened. "Since when do you give a damn about what the rest of the world thinks?" Daniel didn't answer, because the truth was, he never had. Until now. By midday, the tension had settled deep in Daniel's chest. Olivia had been busy handling ranch business, and though they had crossed paths a few times, the easy rhythm they had started to build was off, and she noticed. By late afternoon, she finally cornered him near the equipment shed. "You've been avoiding me," she said, arms crossed. Daniel sighed, not bothering to deny it. "I've just been busy." Olivia wasn't buying it. "No, you're pulling away, and I want to know why." He hesitated, staring at the ground before finally meeting her gaze. "You ever think about what happens next?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean this." He gestured vaguely between them. "What are we even doing here, Olivia?" She stared at him, her expression unreadable. "I thought that was obvious." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Maybe for you. But for me, I don't know how this works. I don't know how we work." Her jaw tightened. "So what, you just decided to push me away before we even figure it out?" "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," she snapped. "You're the one making it complicated." Daniel exhaled sharply. "You heard what people are saying, that I don't belong here, that guys like me don't end up with women like you." Olivia's eyes flashed with something fierce. "And you care what they think?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. Her shoulders squared, her voice quieter, but no less firm. "I didn't think you were the kind of man who ran away when things got hard." Daniel flinched, her words hitting their mark, but before he could say anything, she shook her head, stepping back. "If you're looking for an excuse to leave, fine, but don't stand here and tell me it's because we can't work. That's a choice you're making, not me." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling like the biggest damn fool in the world. Daniel didn't know how long he stood there, replaying the conversation in his head, but by the time he finally moved, the sun was dipping low in the sky. He found himself heading toward the barn, not even sure what he was looking for, until he spotted Bill sitting on a hay bale, cleaning a worn leather saddle. The old foreman glanced up as Daniel approached, giving him a knowing look. "Figured you'd come round sooner or later." Daniel leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "She talked to you?" Bill snorted. "Kid, she don't need to. Ain't hard to see what's going on." Daniel sighed, staring out at the fields. "I don't know what to do." Bill set down the saddle, wiping his hands on a rag. "Let me tell you something about that girl. I've known Olivia since she was in pigtails, running around this place like she owned it, and when her daddy passed, everyone thought she'd sell the ranch, that she wouldn't last a year." Daniel listened silently, but she proved him wrong. Bill continued, "and not because she had money, not because she had some damn fancy last name. She did it because she's got more grit than half the men I've ever met, and now, for the first time in a long time, I see that girl looking at someone like she's got something worth fighting for." Daniel swallowed hard. "Bill," the older man cut him off. "So if you're going to walk away, do it, but don't you dare stand here and act like she's the one making a mistake." Silence stretched between them, and for the first time Daniel realized Bill was right. This wasn't about whether he belonged. This was about whether he was brave enough to take a chance. By the time Daniel made it back to the house, the sky was painted in shades of violet and gold. He found Olivia standing on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the horizon. She heard his footsteps but didn't turn around. He took a breath. "I'm sorry," she exhaled. "For what?" "For doubting this. For doubting you." Finally, she turned to face him, her expression guarded. "And?" Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady. "And I don't want to run. Not from this, not from you." Her eyes searched his, as if trying to determine whether she could trust his words. Then slowly, she nodded. "You're damn right you don't," she murmured, a small smile tugging at her lips. Daniel exhaled a laugh, relief washing over him. Maybe this wasn't going to be easy. Maybe the world would always have something to say. But right now, as Olivia reached for his hand, none of that mattered, because he wasn't going anywhere, not this time. The next morning, the ranch was alive with movement. The clatter of hooves on packed earth, the low murmur of the workers exchanging morning greetings, and the distant rumble of machinery created a familiar symphony of life on the Harrington ranch. Daniel had woken up early, even earlier than usual, his mind clearer than it had been in weeks. He had made his decision. He was staying. And now, for the first time, he was seeing this place not just as a job, but as something more. Something that felt like home. As he stepped into the barn, he found Olivia already there, brushing down one of the horses. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, her eyes searching his, as if checking to see if last night had been real. "Morning," she said cautiously. Daniel leaned against the stall, watching her. "Morning," she nodded, waiting for him to say more. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I meant what I said last night, Olivia. I'm not going anywhere." Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, but also something deeper. "Good," she said simply, but he could see the tension in her shoulders ease just a little. Daniel smirked. "You don't have to sound so surprised." "I'm not surprised," she replied, "just trying not to get my hopes up." His smirk softened into something more sincere. "You can." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, as if realizing they were lingering too long in something unspoken, Olivia cleared her throat. "Come on," she said, leading the way outside. "There's work to do." The day passed in a blur of work, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt like he belonged. The ranch hands, who had once eyed him with skepticism, seemed to be coming around. Bill nodded approvingly at him more than once. Even the animals, stubborn as they could be, seemed to accept his presence. And Olivia, she was still Olivia, strong, focused, determined. But every now and then he'd catch her looking at him when she thought he wasn't watching. And every time something inside him settled just a little more. But peace never lasted long. By late afternoon, an unexpected visitor pulled up to the ranch. Blake Holloway, the owner of a neighboring property and one of the most powerful landowners in the county. He was tall, polished, and carried himself like a man used to getting his way. Daniel had heard of him before. A businessman first, a rancher second, and the kind of man who didn't take no for an answer. Olivia met Blake outside the main house, arms crossed. Daniel stayed back at first, not wanting to interfere, but something about the way she squared. Her shoulders told him this wasn't just a social call. "Olivia," Blake greeted smoothly. "Always a pleasure." She didn't return the sentiment. "What do you want, Blake?" Blake glanced around the ranch, his expression unreadable. "I heard about the cattle rustling incident the other night. Unfortunate situation. We handled it," Olivia said coolly. Blake nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "That's good to hear, but it got me thinking. You run a fine operation here, but it's a big place for one person to manage. If you ever considered selling—" "Not a chance," Olivia interrupted, her tone sharp. Blake sighed, shaking his head as if she were a child refusing to see reason. You're a smart woman, Olivia. You know the industry is changing. Small, family-run ranches are struggling. You could take my offer, walk away with more money than you'd ever need, and never have to worry about another night like the one you had this week. Olivia's jaw tightened. I'm not selling. Blake's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. It's not personal. It's business. She lifted her chin. This ranch is personal. My father built this from nothing, and I won't let someone like you tear it down. Blake exhaled, as if disappointed. Well, that's a shame. He turned his attention toward Daniel for the first time, as if finally noticing him. And you must be the new mechanic, Blake said, voice smooth but laced with something patronizing. Daniel met his gaze, unfazed. Something like that. Blake smirked. Hope you're not getting too comfortable. A place like this won't last forever. Daniel held his ground. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing about you. A flicker of annoyance passed over Blake's face, but he quickly masked it. Well, I suppose we'll see. With that, he tipped his hat to Olivia, then turned and walked back to his truck. As he drove off, Olivia let out a breath, shaking her head. That man is relentless. Daniel watched the dust settle behind Blake's truck. He ever tried this before? More times than I can count. Olivia sighed, rubbing her temples. He wants to buy up every independent ranch in the area and turn them into one giant corporate operation. I've turned him down every time, but he doesn't take rejection well. Daniel studied her. You all right? She gave him a tired smile. I will be. He hesitated for a moment, then said, You know, you don't have to handle this alone. She looked at him then, something unreadable in her eyes. I know. And this time, Daniel believed her. That night, as Daniel sat outside the barn, the conversation with Blake still played in his mind. He had seen men like that before. Men who thought money was the only thing that mattered. Men who believed everything had a price. But Olivia, she wasn't for sale, and damn if he wasn't starting to realize just how much that meant to him. Bill wandered over, hands in his pockets. Heard Holloway showed up today. Daniel nodded. Yeah, seems like he's not giving up, Bill snorted. That man wouldn't know honor if it kicked him in the teeth. Daniel smirked. Agreed. Bill studied him for a moment. So, you really staying? Daniel exhaled, looking out at the land before him, at the place that had slowly started to feel like something more than just a job. At the woman who had made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. He nodded. Yeah, I'm staying. Bill clapped a hand on his shoulder. Good, she's gonna need you. And for the first time, Daniel didn't just hear the words, he believed them. The days following Blake Holloway's visit passed in a tense, uneasy rhythm. Olivia threw herself into work, determined to reinforce security around the ranch, while Daniel kept himself busy repairing fences and machinery. They didn't talk much about what had happened, but the weight of it hung in the air like an approaching storm. Daniel had never been one for words, but he saw the worry in Olivia's eyes, the way her fingers tightened around the reins when she rode out to inspect the pastures, the way her shoulders tensed whenever a truck she didn't recognize drove by. Blake wasn't done. They both knew it, and that meant things were only going to get worse before they got better. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel was in the workshop finishing up some welding repairs on one of the irrigation pumps when he heard the sound of tires crunching against gravel. He stepped out just in time to see a black SUV pulling up to the barn. The door opened, and a man Daniel didn't recognize stepped out. Tall, dressed in clean-cut jeans and a button-down, the kind of person who didn't belong on a ranch but wanted to pretend he did. Daniel's instincts went on high alert. The man glanced around before spotting Daniel and walking toward him. You Carter? The man asked, his voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable edge. Daniel crossed his arms. Who's asking? The man smirked. Let's just say I work for someone who's got an interest in this place. Daniel's jaw tightened. Let me guess, Blake Holloway? The man's smirk widened. You catch on quick. He took a step closer. Look, I'll make this simple. This ranch? It's a losing battle. Holloway's offering her a way out, but she's too stubborn to take. It may be she needs a little push. Daniel's fists clenched. You threatening her? The man laughed, shaking his head. Nah, just giving a friendly warning. Accidents happen on places like this. Equipment breaks. Fires start. And it'd be a damn shame if something happened because someone wasn't smart enough to take a good deal. Daniel's blood ran hot, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't do Olivia any good. You tell Holloway that if he tries anything, he's going to have a hell of a fight on his hands, Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. The man chuckled. Suit yourself. Just remember, you can't fix everything, Carter. With that, he turned, climbed back into the SUV and drove off, leaving Daniel standing there, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles ached. He had dealt with bullies before, but this was different. This was about Olivia, and he wasn't about to let anyone take what was hers. By the time Daniel found Olivia, she was in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. She looked up when he stormed in, immediately sensing something was wrong. What happened? She asked. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. One of Holloway's men just paid me a visit. Her eyes darkened. What did he say? Daniel hesitated, knowing she wouldn't want to hear it. He made it clear that if you don't take Holloway's offer, things could go wrong around here. Olivia's grip on the brush tightened. That son of a... She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. I knew he'd try something, but this... He's not bluffing, Olivia, Daniel said. You need to be careful. She met his gaze, fire burning in her eyes. I'm not afraid of him. Daniel took a step closer. You should be, because people like him, they don't play fair. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Olivia sighed, shaking her head. So what do we do? Daniel didn't hesitate. We fight. Her lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected that answer. I'm not letting him take this place from you, Daniel continued, his voice steady. We reinforce security. We get cameras up where they're needed. We make sure he knows that if he comes after you, he's coming after all of us. Olivia studied him, and something in her expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable. This isn't your fight, Daniel, she said quietly. His jaw tightened. It is now. She swallowed hard, looking away. You don't have to do this. You don't have to stay. Daniel exhaled sharply, then reached out, tilting her chin up so she had no choice but to look at him. I'm not going anywhere. Olivia. She stared at him, her defenses cracking just slightly. Then before she could say anything else, Daniel did the only thing that felt right. He kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hesitant. It was slow, deliberate. A promise in the way his lips moved against hers, in the way his hands found her waist, anchoring her to him. And this time, Olivia didn't pull away. She kissed him back, her hands sliding up his arms, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, as if holding on for dear life. By the time they broke apart, both of them were breathless. Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. You really mean it, don't you? Daniel cupped her face gently. Yeah, I do. For the first time in a long time, she let herself believe him. The next day, the entire ranch came together to prepare. Security cameras were installed. Gates were reinforced. Extra hands were brought in to help keep watch. Olivia wasn't backing down, and neither was Daniel. Blake Holloway wanted a fight. He was about to get one. But even as the ranch stood strong, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still coming. And when it did, he'd be ready. Because this time, he wasn't just fighting for a job. He was fighting for her. Morning sky was painted in deep hues of orange and gold as the sun crept over the horizon. The ranch had never felt more alive or more on edge. Workers moved with purpose, double-checking security cameras, reinforcing fences, and keeping watch over the livestock. The air was thick with anticipation, as if everyone knew today would be different. Daniel stood near the barn, rolling up his sleeves, his gaze scanning the property. He had spent the last 2 days preparing alongside Olivia and her crew, ensuring that if Blake Holloway made good on his threats, they would be ready. But deep down, Daniel knew this fight wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It was about home. It was about Olivia, and he'd be damned if he let anyone take that from her. Mid-morning, the sound of tires crunching against gravel echoed across the open land. A black SUV, followed by 2 pickup trucks, rolled up the long dirt road leading to the ranch. Daniel's muscles tensed. He recognized the vehicle. It belonged to the same man who had delivered the warning days earlier. Olivia stepped beside him, her expression unreadable but her stance unwavering. "You ready?" Daniel asked. She let out a slow breath. "I was born ready." The SUV door opened, and out stepped Blake Holloway, dressed in his usual polished boots and pressed shirt, a man who looked more at home in a corporate office than on a ranch. Behind him, his men stood with arms crossed, their presence meant to intimidate. It wasn't working. Blake's sharp gaze landed on Olivia first. "I was hoping we wouldn't have to do this the hard way," he said smoothly. Olivia crossed her arms. "You don't belong here, Blake. Take your men and leave." Blake tisked, shaking his head. "Come on now, Olivia. You can't possibly believe this is a fight you'll win. You're running this place on a shoestring budget, barely keeping up with repairs. One bad season, one market downturn, and you'll be begging for my offer." Daniel stepped forward, his stance firm. "She's not alone, and she's not selling." Blake's eyes flickered toward him, amusement dancing in them. "Ah, the mechanic." He let out a dry chuckle. "You think you can protect her?" "From me?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I don't think, I know." Blake's jaw tightened slightly, but he quickly recovered, turning back to Olivia. "Last chance. Sell now, and I'll make sure you walk away comfortable. Keep fighting, and I promise you, I'll make this place unlivable." Olivia's voice was calm but resolute. "You don't own me, Blake, and you never will." For a moment there was only silence. Then, slowly, a smirk spread across Blake's face. "Have it your way." He nodded toward his men, and they turned back toward their trucks. But before getting into his SUV, Blake leaned in slightly toward Olivia. "I'll be watching," he murmured, "and when you fail, I'll be waiting." Olivia didn't blink. "You'll be waiting forever." Blake chuckled, then climbed into his vehicle. Moments later, the convoy of trucks pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust as they disappeared down the road. As soon as they were gone, Olivia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Daniel turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded. "Yeah, I just—" Before she could finish, Bill walked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "I think that went well," he said dryly. Olivia let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "We'll see." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her back. "No, we won't, because you're not going anywhere." She looked up at him then, something unreadable in her expression. And for the first time in weeks, the weight that had been pressing down on her shoulders felt just a little lighter. That evening, the ranch was alive with celebration. The workers had stayed late, laughter and music filling the night air as they gathered in the open field. There was a bonfire crackling, plates piled high with food, and for the first time in a long time, there was no tension, just relief. Daniel found Olivia standing a little off to the side, watching the festivities with a small smile. "Not celebrating?" he asked, handing her a glass of lemonade. She took it, smirking. "Oh, I am, just taking it in." Daniel studied her. "You did it, you know. You stood your ground." She nodded, exhaling. "Yeah, but I didn't do it alone." Their eyes met, and the moment stretched between them, quiet, full of unspoken things. Then softly, Olivia asked, You really staying?" Daniel reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah, I am." She let out a breath, something like relief washing over her features, and then, before he could say anything else, she leaned in and kissed him. It was different this time. Slower, deeper. A kiss that wasn't rushed or desperate, but sure. Like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of something new. When they pulled away, Olivia rested her forehead against his. "This place wouldn't be the same without you," she murmured. Daniel smiled. "I guess I finally found something worth staying for," she grinned. "Took you long enough." They laughed, the sound blending into the night as the music played and the fire crackled, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should be. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And sometimes, that was all that mattered. The Texas sun was warm on Daniel's back as he adjusted the bolts on the new irrigation system. The ranch had been through a lot in the past year, but it had survived. They had survived. He stood, wiping his hands on his jeans, and turned to see Olivia walking toward him. She had that same determined look she always did, but there was something softer in her now, something at peace. "Busy?" she teased. He smirked. "Always." She wrapped her arms around him, pressing a quick kiss to his cheek. "I've got something to show you." He followed her to the hilltop, where they had first sat all those months ago. Where the land stretched out endlessly before them, she pointed to a new wooden sign at the entrance of the property. Daniel stared at it, something tight forming in his chest. "You changed the name," he murmured. She smiled. "Because you're part of this now, for good." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head with a chuckle. "You really don't give up, do you?" She grinned. "Not when something's worth fighting for." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the wind rustled through the fields. Home. He had finally found it, and this time he wasn't going anywhere. Wow, what a journey, right? Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from a cozy town like Willow Creek, or maybe from a big city dreaming of country love? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far our community reaches. And if you enjoyed this heartwarming story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring love story. Your support means the world, and I truly appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to watch, comment, and share these stories. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.